One of the questions I've been asking myself, especially with the off-the-rails insanity that is Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne, is this. What the hell happened to the galaxy and its technology? What do I mean by this? Well, outside of obvious visuals that parallel the movies because Star Wars, or laziness, the technology seems to be clearly on par with the prequels, and in some cases, more advanced. So take for example this. This is the Desolator. By stealing 3 different superweapons from the Republic, the Empire was able to create a planet-killing weapon and mount it on a Star Destroyer. If a planet-killing weapon sounds familiar, then congrats, you've watched a film, or read a book, or played a game. Even in regards to Star Destroyers, the Harrower-class Dreadnought was the same size as a Victory-class Star Destroyer, albeit slightly smaller. However, the Harrower required less crew, carried more troops, and had a similar armament. Even in droid design, the Old Republic seems to have more advanced designs. Now, admittedly, I'm pulling this one out of my ass, but my point is still there. Visually, they seem to have more going on. The technology of the Old Republic seems to be on par with that of the prequel Republic to the early days of the Empire. Even I have to admit that the mid to late days of the Empire had some crazy technology. With that said, let's take a look at the Star Wars timeline. The Legends one. The canon one is still too small, and I believe that everything is canon until proven otherwise. Essentially, I want to document what happens from basically the end of Swtor, Star Wars: The Old Republic, going into the 1,000 years before the prequels occur. So, moving on. On 3638 BBY, before the Battle of Yavin, for those who aren't in the know, Revan is finally defeated on Yavin 4. The Shadow of Revan expansion ends at this point, and the Sith Emperor's spirit is released. Maybe. It's a bit confusing considering what happens next. Now, sometime later, the Eternal Throne begins its assault on the unprepared galaxy. There's no date for this happening, so I'm going to say it takes 3 years for the main character to do something about it. Why 3? Well, dealing with round numbers sounds easier. Ultimately, this doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about thousands of years. So on 3635 BBY, the Outlander and Darth Mar encounter Valkorion, the Sith Emperor. Shit got confusing. Mar gets axed, and the Outlander is thrown into carbonite for 5 years. Then he's thawed out, and the events of Knights of the Fallen Empire play out, as well as Knights of the Eternal Throne. Again, there's no timeline really giving for how long this takes. So 2 expansions, I'm going to say it takes 2 years for the Alliance to battle the Fallen, or not the Fallen Empire, to battle the Eternal Throne. So it's 3633 BBY. Naturally, EA is going to milk the hell out of that game, so let's just assume that at some point, the Alliance fades away, and the Republic and Empire go to war with one another. Why can I assume this? Well, the Empire ceases to exist. They vanish almost without a trace. The next events in the timeline take place on 3500 BBY. The Republic discovers the species known as the Iktachi. I hope I said that right. After that, the Centrality, a group of star systems, is founded on 3350 BBY. It is consisted of systems that have left the Republic due to anger surrounding the government's corruption. This points to something. It is safe for systems to leave the Republic. There's no fear of an empire conquering them. The Rift Alliance of the Old Republic was similar to the Centrality, a group of disenfranchised systems who wished to leave. Ultimately, the Bar Senthor of the Jedi Order kept them on, but the threat of the Empire, as witnessed with the Balmoran occupation, aided in dissuading those who wished to leave. Essentially, the galaxy, there was no neutral systems. There was light and dark, Empire and Republic. So by 3350 BBY, it is safe to assume that the Sith Empire was gone. Then on 3200 BBY, the Yavin system is rediscovered, a world that has played a significant role in the galactic history twice already. A world that Exar Kun and Revan were both defeated at. The fact that Yavin was lost could point to the idea that the Republic started turning inward and abandoning or losing contact with the Outer Rim territories, or rims that are just far from the core. Then on 3100, the HAPES consortium isolates itself from the galaxy. One thing I want to point out that I kind of skipped over in the initial writing of the script is on 3017 BBY, Coruscant and Corellia are at war with each other. Two founding worlds of the Republic, two core worlds, are fighting each other. Now, naturally, this points to some crazy-ass internal strife within the Republic, but this is the 17th and last conflict of this. So, the only real way that this could actually happen is if the Sith Empire was gone by this point. Because one of the unifying forces with the Republic during Swtor is the fear of the Empire and the power of the Empire. All of that is keeping a lot of the systems together, like I said, with the Rift Alliance. Then on 3000 BBY, the Pacian Empire, God, fuck that name, another independent body, colonizes Dathomir. But on 2992, they collapse. It's just an interesting thing. 8 years, they expand, and then the Empire itself just collapses. Then moving on to 2500 BBY, the battleship era, as it's called, comes to an end. Galactic economies can't handle creating or maintaining ships the size of the Harrower and choose to use smaller vessels. I'll talk about this a little later. But then 500 years later, on 2000 BBY, the new Sith Wars begin after the Fourth Great Schism. For those who are not in the know, a schism is when a large faction of Jedi leave the Order, oftentimes to become Sith. Now, unlike the Empire before it, the Sith of this era may be unified, but they aren't. They're very fragmented. There's a lot of different factions. Now, there may be a new Sith Empire, but it's kind of a loose confederation of people who said, all right, we'll work together. At first, it may have started out as a cohesive unit, but ultimately, as time goes on and the nature of the Sith, they start turning on each other and Sith Lords start infighting. They lack a unifying goal that kept the Sith Empire and Star Wars: The Old Republic together. They lacked a lot of their organization and everything else like that. Moving on. By 1500 BBY, the Republic is forced to draft vast amounts of soldiers to combat the Sith. This could point to a decline in war enthusiasm, for those who've ever played a Paradox game, or a decline in galactic population. Naturally, I think both occurred. Then on 1100 BBY, the Republic Dark Age begins, a point in time where the Republic essentially ceased to exist. The Holonet was gone, basically galactic internet, a means of mass communication, and a plague was ravaging the galaxy, called the Kandorian Plague. And this thing could wipe out 2/3 of an entire planetary population. By 1010 BBY, the Brotherhood of Darkness forms and emerges as the dominant Sith faction in the galaxy. Also at this time, Lord Hoth, a Jedi Lord, rallies the Jedi Baronies and leads the Army of Light against the Sith. I'll touch on this in a moment. On 1000 BBY, the 7th Battle of Ruzon occurs. Darth Bane activates the Thought Bomb and kill off basically every single Sith to ever exist, as well as many Jedi. This ends up leading to Darth Bane creating the Rule of Two and reforming the Sith into how we know them. Not long after that, the Republic reforms, as do the Jedi, with the Ruzon Reformations, into basically the state that we know them in the prequels. Now, why in the unholy hell did I just exposit thousands of years of info? I'll explain. The Star Wars galaxy entered an interregnum, or rather, a time where spacefaring civilizations lose spaceflight. This may not be the actual term for it, but it's one I've heard thrown around. In a regard, I do exaggerate. The galaxy never really loses spaceflight. Maybe some worlds do, but the galaxy at large doesn't lose it. But it lost a lot of its technological progress. And the answer as to why lies with the Second Great Galactic War. A war not on the timeline. With the end of Knights of the Eternal Throne, the galaxy returns to the status quo. The Republic and Empire prepare to kill each other once again, despite the fact that they just got their shit rocked from an unknown third party. So between 3600 and 3350 is when this war occurs. As I stated before, during the Cold War, the period Star Wars: The Old Republic takes place, systems were afraid to leave the Republic. With the centrality forming, this fear no longer exists. With Yavin being rediscovered and the 17th Alskin conflict between Corellia and Coruscant, there's clear political turmoil in the Republic itself. Without an opponent, the Republic begins to fracture, hence the rise of smaller factions across the galaxy. By the time of the prequels, anything resembling Imperial culture is, well, gone. During the early parts of the new Sith Wars, the weapons and armor of the Sith and Republic are similar to Swtor, but by 1000 BBY, Republic forces may have ships, and they may have blasters, but as you can see, something is clearly lacking. What I'm theorizing is this. The Second Great Galactic War was the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. Step aside Mandalorian Wars, move aside Clone Wars, and Galactic Civil War don't make me laugh. As billions of soldiers fight and die all over the galaxy, technology begins to regress as infrastructure needed to make it was destroyed. So ship factories, science labs, anything else. And then, as new generations of people are forced to fight a war instead of learning or practicing science, or even just maintaining a means of mass communication in the infrastructure, technology begins to regress. Here on Earth, we can see this in action. During the beginning of World War II, Nazi Germany had some really advanced weaponry. Hell, they created the first jet and a rocket plane. But due to Allied bombing, fighting a two-front war, and just inept leadership, the Nazis, by the end, were forced to conscript the very young and the very old, and they weren't really using modern weaponry. Due to the infrastructure being gone, surplus weapons had to be used. Now, the war was so brutal, the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim worlds were decimated, resulting in many of them losing contact with the rest of the galaxy. Yavin, as I pointed out earlier. This is without mentioning the complete destruction of the Sith. After the war, the Republic could not keep itself afloat, and had to pull back, losing contact with more worlds, hence the rise of other galactic factions. This also explains the interplanetary conflicts of the core worlds, which would have led to even more depopulation, and widespread depopulation of the galaxy meant capital ships were no longer viable for use. Alongside this, with several generations going without the teachings of those before them, technology begins to evolve at a rapid rate, since no one knows how to maintain it, let alone recreate it. In our own history, we have seen empires that are overstretched, that don't have the means to maintain its holdings, start reverting inward. A very good example of this is the Roman Empire. Towards its collapse, in regions such as Britain, they pulled out because they just couldn't hold on to it anymore. By the time of the new Sith Wars, the Republic is barely holding on. With another 1,000 years of conflict and the forced conscription of Republic citizens, depopulation leads to not only a lack of scientists and those who can progress society, but it also leads to a sharp decline in those who maintain everyday necessities, like the holonet, a major form of galactic communication, or just even factory workers. Granted, they have droids, but they seem to be gone by that point. Droids may exist, but as we've seen, droid technology kind of takes a back seat. Now, one of my friends who's very into some of the lore that I don't know about says that at some point in the Old Republic, there is a droid revolt. This could ultimately explain why droid technology regressed as much as it did, because people are just done with droids, and why none of them are really working factories. When the Republic finally collapses during the Dark Age, manufacturing just slowly grinds to a halt. And without the exchange of information across the galaxy, planets must relearn everything themselves. Hence why later soldiers of the Army of Light are using spears, because the Army of Light was not the Republic army. Since the Republic was gone, what ended up happening is Jedi started becoming leaders of entire worlds. They became Jedi Lords. And eventually, Lord Hoth, the leader of the Army of Light, rallied together all the different Jedi baronies, as they're called, created this army to combat the Army of Darkness, the Brotherhood of Darkness. How awesome would that be, though? During its height, the Old Republic could be considered an equal to the pre-Republic, or the prequel Republic, and early Empire. But the Second Great Galactic War was so brutal, it began the slow death march of the Old Republic. By 1000 BBY, soldiers are literally using spears and shields, and the galaxy, which is being run by Sith and Jedi Lords, was more fragmented than it had ever been. A brutal war without equal, paired up with constant war, leads to depopulation. Depopulation leads to the fragmentation of the Republic, as well as a lack of people to maintain mass communication. The fragmentation and depopulation leads to the Republic collapsing, a technology regressing several centuries or perhaps a millennia back. Well, that's all I've got for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I've been Boofire191. Thanks for watching.